It's the Final Word Cricket Podcast, Season 15, Episode 27, what would have been the fifth day of the Wellington Test between New Zealand and Australia, but not quite. We're here for CBUS.com.au. No 30-second summaries today, a conversation about all sorts of things in and around the global game, a little bit of Australia-New Zealand, or New Zealand-Australia, I should say. We're going to do the Shield round at the very end of the show because there's the possibility that one of the games we're talking about could finish while we're having our earlier chats. There's WPL taking place. There's a fifth test match between India's men and England on the horizon later this week. And, of course, Ireland's historic test victory, which we'll get to pretty soon. It's a shocking day.
It is a shocking day.
Had it made it to day five,
it wouldn't have been.
It wouldn't have been a day five. Yes. I doubt they would have even got a ball bowled. I've been out there this morning on Cuba Street, right where we're staying,
which sort of underlines things for New Zealand a bit. You know, had they managed to bat a couple more sessions, they might have drawn the test match.
Yeah.
I suppose if they batted a couple of sessions, they might have been relatively close enough to want to have a crack at the runs anyway, given the relative scoring speeds of teams these days and all the rest of it. But I
think 258 to win meant that if they were going to bat the whole day, it would have included the extra 30 minutes in all probability. So it's a little bit of a moot point about the rain, but still, it's symbolically, I think, says a little bit about their inability to get to 200 in either innings. And had they batted for longer the first time around, well, then it might have been saved by rain or something like that.
I also don't want to burst your bubble about the live action Shield result, but it's already over. Victoria have lost to Tasmania. Gabe Bell picked up Will Sutherland, and Ian Carlisle's just knocked over Peter Siddle. So Tasmania win by 57 runs.
Okay.
We thought it could have, so that for context, overnight, Victoria needed 69 with 2 wickets in hand, and with Murphy and Sutherland at the crease. We were like, well, maybe it'll come to a dramatic close while we're recording the show, but it's done in the first 5 minutes.
Okay. Well, we'll come back to the Shield round at the end anyway. There's an important conversation to be had around Will Bukowski, which will be in segment 2 or segment 3, depending on how long we gibber for at the start of the show. The start of the show, we're going to go somewhere a little bit unusual, actually. We're going to go to
Port Vila.
We're going to talk about Vanuatu. Friend of the show, Tim Cutler, who started the Emerging Cricket platform a number of years ago now. He was the chief executive of Hong Kong Cricket between 2014 and 2017 when he first came into sort of our orbit, generally speaking, hosts the Emerging Cricket podcast. He's been with Cricket Vanuatu since the pandemic, I want to say, roughly 2021 or thereabouts. Long-term cricket administrator, played a good level of cricket both in Sydney and for the Hong Kong Cricket Club there. But no one had...
Kowloon.
The other one, there's 2 big clubs in Hong Kong. Kowloon, which is the one I was at last year with Fairbreak and Hong Kong, and he played for the latter. But I don't think anyone had on their things to watch in 2024 at age 41, Tim making his list day debut for Vanuatu and doing extremely well in what was a really important tournament as well for lots of reasons. And it's sort of the sad postscript to this is that Vanuatu haven't finished in the top 4 of this qualifying tournament, which puts them in a huge disadvantage across the next 3 or 4 years. So we'll split this into, why don't you explain the Vanuatu situation, then we'll come back to Tim.
Yeah, and so this is relying on the research that Bertus de Jong does, who does some great work on all of the levels of cricket below the ones at the top that the administrators care about. But essentially that the lower levels, the pyramid, the cricket pyramid's been shrinking over the last 10, 15 years because the administrators are cutting costs basically by taking out lower levels and by squeezing the qualification pathway. So the tournament that Vanuatu was playing in was to determine eligibility for the next stage of qualification for the 2027 World Cup. So it was a 50-over tournament.
It's called the ICC Cricket World Cup Challenge League Playoff.
Yes.
And they're playing off to get into the League One thing they had underneath the World Cup Super League, but the one beneath that.
But a stage up, and then there's another stage up and another stage up, and theoretically, if a team could go on a run through all of those stages and qualify for the main draw, which would be 14 teams in 2027. But it's also about what happens, where it places you in the cricket pecking order over that next period of time. So 4 teams qualified out of the, 16 that started. 4 teams qualified for the next stage. Vanuatu just missed out. They were in that Super 6, which determined the last 4 placings. But what that also means is that effectively there's no 50-over cricket for them for the next 4 years. There's no access to it because they won't be part of any pathway. And then when it comes up to qualification for the World Cup after that, 2031, it's going to be done on T20 international rankings. So this is what they've done in order to get rid of having to run the 50-over qualification tournaments that cost money. They're like, no, we'll just do it on T20 rankings. But those things are quite radically divorced from each other in terms of the quality of teams over the two different formats are substantially different. Teams that can compete in one don't necessarily have the kinds of players who do as well in the others, that sort of thing. And for certain teams, it's almost impossible for them to improve their T20 rankings because they don't have viable opposition around them. So to improve your ranking, you have to be playing teams that are slightly above you, because if you're playing teams that are way above you, then you'll get thrashed and it won't help you improve your ranking. If you're playing teams that are below you, your ranking points don't improve very much. You pretty much stay around the same level. And so Vanuatu essentially don't have any affordable opponents in terms of places they can go to travel to. They can afford to put out the costs to be able to do the tours, to play viable opponents who will help them increase their ranking. So they're pretty much stuck. And having missed out on this, it's very hard to see a way that they can find a way out of that and back into qualification pathways in the future.
Rule of thumb is that any tournament that's determined by rankings in cricket is a bad thing. I know that from our friends, well, indeed our friends at Emerging Cricket and others who've crunched the numbers here. It's effectively what happened to the Thai women ahead of I forgot which World Cup it is now. It was the last 50 over World Cup that was meant to be in 2021, got played in early 2022. Yes. That's right.
And they were dominating the qualifications tournament, which got called off because of a COVID breakout. Yeah. And then the places were done on rankings. And of course, they don't even have a ranking. They weren't considered worthy of being ranked. Despite the fact they were beating teams, they were pushed out.
And it is sad because when we had the World Cup Super League in the previous cycle and the level it sat directly below it, they played 24 one-day internationals, that group of teams, across the 3-year cycle, including the USA, who are now going to be at a T20 World Cup this year as a co-host. It can only help that they've played all of this, not just List A cricket or cricket that's played bilateral series that doesn't get recognised as a one-day international, but that's all part of the story. And Vanuatu were vying to be one level below that, and as you say, on that pathway. And teams have gone up and down it. You look at some of the teams that were in this tournament, they're sides that have at different points, like, take Kenya, for example. Kenya were in this.
Yeah. Bermuda were in it.
Teams that have
played senior World Cups.
That's right. So teams that have had to go up and down. Well, in 50 over cricket, it's going to be even harder. Just back to Tim, because it's an interesting personal story for him. I mean, we haven't actually talked to him about this yet. We should get him on the show, but it is a fairly staggering turn of events. Last year in a Pacific series that involved PNG, he took a 5-wicket bag, which I can only assume is what got him to within striking distance of the national team for this far more high-profile series, and he had to make a list day debut at 41 as a slow left-arm spinner. We love old spinners on this show, and then picked up a forfer against Bermuda, the only game that they won in the Super 6 stage, and that wasn't enough to get them through. So I suppose
he's got a Cricinfo page, but he doesn't have a Cricket Archive page yet. They're a bit less automated.
He does. I've been on it.
Have you?
I visited.
I couldn't find it. I was searching it.
I found the scorecard from the game, and he has got a Cricket Archive page. Okay. I went back and looked at all of his games for Hong Kong that are listed in the miscellaneous tab, because that's the sort of thing I do.
Totally.
In my spare time or when preparing for episodes.
He's got a picture on his Cricinfo page. There are some international. I think Shamar Joseph didn't have a picture on his Cricinfo page when he debuted for West Indies.
I'm tipping Big Billy O'Rourke doesn't have a photo on his Cricinfo page either. That might be the right place to segue to the series that we're currently covering. The wash-up, the Day 5. We normally call it the Day 6, but it is Day 5. So interesting little exchange between Tim Southey and the reporters last night around Neil Wagner. Let's start there. So we've speculated playfully, but not too seriously, that he'd be a good option for Christchurch next week. And Southey absolutely did not shut that down in the press conference, right? So all the stories out of the presser was doors ajar for Wagner. Wake up this morning, received a media release from New Zealand Cricket saying that Wagner's been released and he will not be going to Christchurch. Ben Sears has been brought into the squad. Will O'Rourke, Billy King of Geelong, has been released as well because of this hamstring strain that he picked up on.
Awareness.
It's now a strain. It's gone from awareness to a... Okay. Maybe it wasn't awareness at all. I think I just played with that the other day. But you know what I'm trying to say. It's serious enough to keep him out. And Devon Conway requires surgery, 8 weeks out on that bruise. What was a bruised thumb, it's clearly a fracture. Otherwise, they wouldn't be going in to do any surgery when he's a 3-format gun. He'll probably miss the IPL. I would imagine he's an IPL. Not that I know much about the Indian Premier League, but I would have thought that Devon Conway is the kind of player who would be in it.
He plays for Chennai.
Oh, that's good from you. Good knowledge.
He
was
very good over certainly last season and maybe the one before. He made a bunch of runs. I think he got picked up, didn't he, after he had that successful tour to England and made a made the Test 100 at
Test double
Lords and all the rest of it, and I think he got picked up the season after that.
Oh, and that was the year when he made
total speculation. I'm guessing here.
No, he did make. He had a really good T20 World Cup before punching his bat, wasn't it, in the semi-final, and not being able to play Australia in the final. So
don't punch stuff. Stop breaking your hand. I mean, the cricket ball thing you can understand. That's not even joking here. The two fingers on my left hand are still sore from the Jan 26 game when Peter Lewis smoked a drive over cover, and I just put my hand up and slapped it out of the air. Obviously, was never going to catch it because I can't catch, but stop the four. But it's still sore.
You should
this
get
is
that.
Like 6 weeks later.
You should get that looked at because when Barat had that, when all the way through the Ashes series, gee, my fingers are still really sore from that catch I took at your Bucks weekend, and it turned out to be a compound fracture.
It's not broken finger sore. It's just like bruising. It just feels like it's still bruised. I know when I've broken a bone. I've broken like 11 bones or something in my body at different times to the point where I can diagnose myself. Okay. Last time I went into the ER, I've got a green stick of the one of the bits below the thumb. And they were like, okay, yes, you do.
So it's going to be a 13-man squad for New Zealand, and they've got batting cover with Henry Nicholls staying with the squad. I do wonder whether Nicholls-Latham might happen. I mean, they're not talking about this, but I'm still think there's a possibility they'll just press pause on Latham. It's Southey's 100th Test match. Likewise, Kane Williamson, they played their 50th Test matches together. However many years ago, they came through junior ranks together, so it's fitting that they'll take the field at Christchurch together at Hagley Oval when we get there tomorrow, or a couple of days from now when we first start visiting in the pre-game. From an Australian perspective, the Andrew McDonald press conference that he did after play, which has just been released, it does feel to me like the Carey piece of this is less secure than some have reported. He's just less effusive. Carey just needs runs. When we talk about Labuschagne and to an extent Smith, but not really Smith because his ceiling is ridiculously high.
Yeah.
But the high water mark for Labuschagne is high enough that he's batting in every international team in the world, right? And he will probably at some point get close to where he's been before. More often than not, players do have troughs and they do come back when they're as good as Labuschagne has been.
Yep.
What's the ceiling for Carey? What's the high water mark for Carey? I'm just not sure. He's obviously a beautiful player. Like he's aesthetically nice to watch through the covers.
We know he made that 100 against South Africa at the MCG, which was
tough.
A good innings.
A tough innings against hostile bowling. So he's got that in his favour that he's shown that he can do that.
But the things always stood out for me with Carey was from the 2019 World Cup when he was always coming in. He came in a bunch of different situations. There were times when he had to move the scoring on with 8 overs to go. There were times when there'd been a collapse, and he always looked calm. He always looked like he was entirely at ease with the situation. Summed up by the bit where the ball knocks the helmet off his head and he just caught it. He smacked in the chin and he just catches it casually. And apparently that's from people who know him better. That's kind of an illusion. He's actually quite a nervous player, but he looks calm. He looks at ease, and so he gave this impression of being at ease through that early part of his career, and he doesn't give that impression anymore. He does look like a nervous starter now, where he used to just come out and be 15 off 14 balls with just ticking a few around, not going for anything outrageous, but he was just one of those players who'd come out and score from the get-go, and that seems to have changed.
Yeah, there's chunks of his career. There's the first slab of it where he didn't have much success with the bat. There's the second slab of it, so falling in the pool at the Movenpick in Karachi through until the Bairstow stumping when he averaged, I want to say 50. I think he averaged towards 50 anyway with a number of Test half centuries and the ton you referred to before at the MCG. And there's the period from the Bairstow stumping through to now where he makes the 50 at the MCG against Pakistan last December, which was a good half century. I'm not going to diminish what he has done.
And he made some important runs. So he made the 50. He made the 50 in Melbourne. He made some important runs in Sydney, and he made another 50 in Brisbane.
Yeah. So it wasn't a complete misadventure, but
that's after absolutely decisive innings in the World Test Championship final and in the first Ashes Test win. So he's done a lot well in not even the last year, in less than the last 12 months. And so I don't know. I think there's the reaction's somewhat disproportionate.
Yeah, I don't know whether it is. Like, I just feel, and this is, I don't want him to be left out on a personal level. He's a lovely fella, but being a lovely fella isn't currency when there's someone who might have a higher watermark, and that's Josh Inglis, right? So Inglis has replaced Carey in the 50-over team, in the 20-over team. I know the 20-over team, Inglis has sometimes been playing as an outfielder with Wade keeping, but nevertheless he's in that slot that Carey previously owned. Going back a while now for him in T20 cricket, but certainly 50-over cricket. During the World Cup, they're like, we think that Inglis is our man, and Inglis played some really important innings, and now looks like he's good to go in both ball formats for the foreseeable future.
Yep.
And Inglis rattled off 147 2 days ago for Western Australia after making a 40-odd in the first innings as well. So the fact that there's only one more test left in the run could work either way for Carey. If Carey makes runs this week at Christchurch, it'll keep the ball from the door. Double failure, and if Inglis makes runs again for WA next week, and indeed in the Shield final, it could be one of those where before the Australian summer, they find themselves in a bit of a shootout.
The key is the length of the gap between now and when they're next going to play Test cricket, which is November, mid-November. So I don't think a decision would be made on the basis of what happens in Christchurch next week. I think it'd have to be made on the basis of what happens in some Shield rounds and lead up to that series, because it's such a long way away. One thing we missed with the Vanuatu chat, which was very, very, very much our areas and was brought to our attention by Sheehan Arnott, friend of the show. The tactical wide. Now, we spoke about this on the show a few months ago in relation to net run rate, because we're very interested in net run rate. And I don't know if you remember exactly how it works, but it actually happened against Vanuatu by Malaysia, who eventually didn't qualify in the end. But they did their best to qualify because they knew that they could get ahead of Vanuatu on net run rate in this very specific scenario, right? So in this game, Malaysia have made 124. They've been bowled out. They're not going to defend it. Vanuatu are on 124 coming to the end of an over. And so the way this works is that you've got a certain net run rate which is based on the score that you've made in the innings. So if you match your opponent's, if you get 1 run past your opponent's score, your net run rate's going to be a little lower than if you go 5 past your opponent's score. Say you hit a 6 from the last ball of your innings, those runs count.
That's quite a bit when you consider we're talking here about a target of 124.
Exactly. So it would have meant that had Vanuatu hit a 6 from the last ball of that over, or even from any of the balls in the next over, because the whole over, once you've entered an over, that over counts as a whole over. If they'd gone 5 runs past Malaysia's score, then they would have gained a net run rate boost that would have kept Malaysia below them on the table. But if they went 1 run past Malaysia's score, they wouldn't. And Malaysia knew this, and they deliberately bowled a wide from the last ball of the over to ensure, because they knew they were going to lose anyway, it ensured they lost by 1 run instead of losing by 5 runs by conceding a 6, or by 3 runs if they'd conceded a 4.
Well, it would have been by wickets.
Oh, sorry, it would have, actually scores were level, so they could have. Vanuatu could have gone 4 runs past or 6 runs past. Yeah. So technically, it's a loss by wickets, but the margin would have been 4 or 6 runs rather than 1 run.
It also frees you up. I'm not sure what ball this game finished on. Was it the last ball of the over?
Yeah.
Right. So I wonder how many balls they were on level scores for, because because of course wickets don't matter in net run rate land.
Yeah.
So you could send out, let's say they're 5 or 6 down, you could say to every batter who's walking in, you are only there to hear the 6 at this point. Doesn't matter if you get bowled first ball. We're going to have 5 free swings effectively, so long as you've got enough
as long as you don't push into the over after that, because
that's right.
then you've lost another over. So they actually did it. They had a team chat. They came together, they spoke, and then bowled really wide outside the off stump. It gets called. And if that, say, goes for 5 wides, the 5 wides don't count, because the first wide is counted and the game's over as soon as the first wide's called.
Is it?
Yeah. So as soon as, in the same way as if you run 2, you don't get the 2, you only get the first 1.
Interesting. So just to be clear, if you bowl the ball down leg side and it goes for 5 wides,
you get
the
batting team gets 1.
bypasses the keeper, even though the batters haven't left their ground.
Because the 5 wides is 1 plus 4.
No, I understand that, but I mean,
so the 1 is counted first. So as soon as, or if it's an overstep, or if it's down the leg side, as soon as that's happened, that's it. That's the 1. You're done. End of the game.
Quirky to think we spend so much time on this stuff yet. I would have said, no, I'm pretty sure that'll be 5. In the same way that if you hit the boundary, like that example we talked about from Zimbabwe against Zimbabwe at Belrive with Mark Moore and Brad Haddon, long time ago now, where they didn't cross. They made sure the ball passed the rope in order to get War his century when he was on 99, I think it was. And Adam Gilchrist at the same ground in 1999 against Pakistan, they ran hard for 1. The ball went for 4, but he didn't get credited with 4, and thus he was 149 not out at the end, not 152 not out at the end, which would have felt fitting given what an innings it was. One more thing out of McDonald, by the way. You said the Shield rounds next year before the Border Gavaskar. Or this year, I should say, which there'll be about 5, as I understand it. There is a white ball series that I didn't know about against Pakistan as well at the same time. Okay. So this is the Glenn Maxwell conundrum over many years, is that he's not been able to play red ball cricket at the time of the year that it's useful to play red ball cricket, because often he's got white ball commitments. Well, Australia managed that with Cameron Green ahead of this series, and they did a superb job. Made a Shield 100 a couple of weeks ago against Tasmania, who are top of the table and will remain there after their win against Victoria. And that's given him the perfect lead up to a test series, and we saw how well he performed the other day. And McDonald's like, a lesson learned. Maybe we have to mix and match a little bit more about those who are going to be playing test cricket, but are 3-format players. So I'm thinking Labuschagne perhaps they might prioritise him playing for Queensland over playing those white ball games against Pakistan. So that was quite interesting as a management device, because often we've seen players who are readying themselves for a test series. Steve Smith last home summer, wasn't it? How many days at home did he get between finishing his white ball commitments in India and playing the first test? There was no chance to play a red ball game. I took that to be they're going to try and be a bit more clever around that, especially given they've got 5 test matches in probably 6.5 weeks against India, so there'll be no other opportunity to fine-tune other than in the middle in test matches against some of the best players in the world.
It also seems like they've tried Green in all of the formats to see what works for him, and now that he's absolutely nailed a decisive test innings, they're like, cool, okay, let's just focus on this for now. We'll have to come to Ireland after Nerd Pledge, I reckon, but Nathan Lyon, the last bit of what happened during this week, we were talking about the average. There's just lots of different ways you can slice his numbers. I like that this year he's averaging 17 in the 4 tests that he's played.
Okay.
And then Glenn Mitchell, who, friend of the show, hello Glenn, sliced up these numbers. His last 100 wickets, Lions' last 20 tests, have yielded 100 wickets at 22.6 and a strike rate of 46. His career strike rate's over 60. It is
a ridiculous strike rate for a spinner. I think Warne's strike rate from memory was 55 or something like that. That is as good as it gets. 5 fifers in that run, 2 10-wicket matches as well, including yesterday. So he's 181.
57.4.
57, there you go. So he's 181 wickets away from Warne, using that reference point. And Dan Cherney wrote a piece for the News Corp websites and papers overnight about this, sort of saying that this seems outlandish to say. Well, some of us were saying it back in 2015. Let's see if we can drop in a conversation that Jeff and I had on one of the very first episodes of The Final Word.
Steve O'Keefe will partner Nathan Lyon. Let's talk about him for a little bit.
Please.
He's already the highest ever off spinner in terms of wickets taken. He went to 182 during the Boxing Day test, so that took him past Jeff Lawson. It means we'll probably see his 200th wicket in Sri Lanka, all going well, and that gets him past Jeff Thompson and into the real elite of Australian wicket takers. Then you're sort of into the top 15 or so. But he's 27 years old. He could.
He just turned 28, actually, so he's not far away from. Well, you say the top 10, I think, from memory is 228 with Ray Lindwall. So he's going to be in the top 10 Australian bowlers by the middle of this year. That's extraordinary. The 2 figures I've got in headlights for him are Graham Swan's wicket tally. So Graham Swan took 255 test wickets, and then the great Lance Gibbs. Not far off at all. He could take
maybe
it next
2 years.
Maybe not even that. And then the great Lance Gibbs, 309 test wickets, and he was always the gold standard for off spinners. That's not that far away. He could be a couple of years away from being not just elite in an Australian context, but all-time greatest off spinners, with the exception of Murali Durham.
That's an interesting thought. All right, so he's just turned 28, you say.
Yep.
Say he could play. Look, Shane Warne retired at 38. So let's say Nathan Lyon played another 10 years. Let's say he averaged about 50 wickets a year, 500 to add to the 180 he's got at the moment.
I see what you're doing.
682, Warne, 708. He'd be within sniffing distance. Imagine how is Shane Warne going to react if sneaky little Nath Lyon just Stephen Bradbury's him on the outside and just sneaks past into top Australian wicket-taking contention in a decade's time?
Well, if Nathan Lyon plays for 10 more years, he'll play more test matches than Sachin Tendulkar. That's one thing to note, given the amount of tests that they'll play 150 tests over the next 10 years. So first of all, he'll break all the records, which would be great for other reasons. But if he did overtake Shane Warne, what a great story that'd be. It'd be even better than the one we've already seen. Let's back it in. Nathan for 709.
Let's
get there nice and early.
I don't think he's going to get Murali, but like the Warne, it's stretching.
We've come this far. 2 more years, plays till he's 40.
Yeah.
Who knows? He's a fit man.
How old is he going to be?
If he plays till it'll be enough time to catch Murali on 800 wickets. So I'm not sure if that's going to sound good or not. That might just be absolute dribble from you and I. But we, at the time, said this is how Nathan Lyon can overtake Warne, then Murali. Murali might be a stretch, but they keep talking about 4 years of Test cricket, right? Yeah. So let's do the maths now. Right? 4 years of Test cricket.
One big thing is there's no overseas tour after this year. So that does cost him because there'd be a lot of years where there might be 5 or 6 tests through the middle.
But that's fine. I think that's okay. So he'll play 5 against India, not 4. He'll then play 2 against Sri Lanka next January and February, where they're going after that. It might be, I'm told, it might be 3 against the West Indies in June next year, not 2. They're working on trying to squeeze the sponge, or trying to distribute the days, because the World Test Championship final is the first week of June. If they make it, then potentially 3 against the Windies away from home, which you would think that he will do well there based on the surfaces we've seen in Caribbean Test cricket over the last 10 to 15 years. Got a pretty good record there, albeit from a long time ago now in 2012 and 2015.
So if they made the final, they'd be up to 11.
Right, home summer against England, that's 5, that's 16. So you're cramming in 16 Test matches between now and 18 months from now.
Over a year,
So that's quite a bit of cricket then. I suppose on average Australia play about 10 Test matches per year. So if he played about 40, based on the Glenn Mitchell numbers here, about 40 should get him about 181 wickets, maybe 200 if he goes really, really well. So it might only take... It may not even need to get to that 2027 year.
Yeah, if he could take 5 per test, he's probably more a 4 wickets per test kind of.
Historically, he has been. He's been 5 per test in this run, but 4 per test before that. But if you get him somewhere in that window,
if he plays 40 and gets 4 per test, it's 160. Then he's close enough to be like, I just give him a couple more series and see.
Well, this is it, and he's on the record. I spoke to him yesterday. I think you did as well, didn't you? After play, and we did the usual longevity chat with him, and he's saying his action's so efficient, like he's so lithe and so injuries have not followed him apart from that one calf strain, and maybe that'll extend his career. If he plays those last 3.5 Test matches against England, if Australia get up in any of the last 3, he might say, well, that's box checked. Now he's desperate to get back to England in 2027.
True.
There's India, which will be another lure for him also in 2027. The sesquicentenary Test match, which would be a wonderful thing for him to be part of, given by then he'll be up around over 150 Test matches played. It'd be fitting if someone of his stature in the game was able to play that in the March of 2027. So there's quite a bit there, and that's a whole extra World Test Championship cycle, which if he's going to play against England, well, the WTC final, if they get that far, it could be that there's another opportunity to win an ICC trophy. I genuinely think this is going to happen.
Okay.
I don't think this is speculative anymore. I reckon it's more likely to happen than not happen for Warne. Murali, that would take him probably playing 2 further years onto that.
He'd need to play to 41 or something.
Yeah, play to 42. Well, there's a bloke called James Anderson who's going to be playing to his 42.
So bowls a bit quicker too.
It could happen. But anyway, that's some line spec for you on the way out into Nerd Pledge.
There we go. Let's get on with a little bit of Nerd Pledge. Nerd Pledge, the game we play with nice people on the internet, the ones who make this program possible. They fund the show by sending in contributions in a currency of their choice and a number of their choice. The number relates to cricket. We have to figure out what the number means.
The number is Matt Baker today for you, Jeff. 572. So a decimal point in there after the 5. In the GBP.
Yes.
In sterling, as they say. It's a new number. New pledge at Matt. Terrific. There were a bunch of new pledges in Wellington the other night who came up to me and said, I've been listening to the show for a long time and decided to now be a patron. I'm like, that is terrific. That's exactly what we want. People who have, over time, had the argument made through our weekend show and this and everything else we're putting together. Matt is one of those people. Jeff, tell a story for him, please. Matt,
£5.72, that's your number. There wasn't a clue unless I missed it. If I did, let me know afterwards. So I looked at, initially I thought 572 kind of felt like a big team score, but it doesn't relate to England so much with the first couple. So India made it while thrashing Australia in Chennai in 2013.
That's PTSD stuff for Lyon, by the way. That's the 4 for 200 when he's dropped afterwards, gets Sachin through the gate.
That's right.
I was watching that at Sunshine Coast Airport, having been at a wedding the previous day, and by the time I landed in Canberra, things were dramatically different with MS Dhoni making a double.
And MSG Dhoni, just more. His Lions' best figures for a long time were that 12 for 240 or whatever it is.
Delhi.
And then he finally got the Bangladesh game where he took 13 for 150 and managed to nudge that away from being his best.
That's right, because it was the 9-wicket haul at Delhi where he took the 7 for 90 odd, I think, from memory. Then he overtook that with the Phil Hughes Test match in 2000 and late 2014, where it was the 12 for 200 odd.
Yep.
And then, the Bangladesh test in 2017 at Chattagram.
Lisa needs braces. Now, right, so India made that while thrashing Australia, and then Australia got their own back and made the same score in Sydney 2015, but couldn't bowl out India on the last day, couldn't get the last 3 wickets when Jinky Rahane and Bhuvneshwar Kumar batted out the game.
God, that was a grim test match, wasn't it?
It was one of the... Yeah, it was in that era of awful Australian pitches.
Steve Smith, when he was standing in as captain and didn't quite get the timing of the declarations right.
Made 100.
Yeah, he certainly made a lot of runs that series. But the Melbourne and Sydney test,
I think it rained. I think it rained during the last session. Maybe.
Rained in Sydney?
Yeah. I know. It's hard to believe.
Fair income.
Yes. Steve Smith was captain. Started out as a leg spinner. Right. Anyway, it's probably nothing to do with that. There is an England one, though, although it's probably not a good number for England, really. It's a frustrating number for England. We've talked about this test match a bunch of times in the context of Gary Kirsten's 275 and how it was the equal highest South African score for a long time. Was Cullinan, who also had 275?
And that was just before, and this was the final 100 made of the 20th century.
That's right.
The last day of the, I think it was December 30 when the test ended.
Before Y2K crashed Cricinfo and wiped out Gary Kirsten's numbers. I had forgotten, though, that he made it following on. Last test of the millennium, England touring South Africa. Nasser Hussain makes a big 100, 146 not out. Mark Butcher makes 48, Alex Stewart 95, LBW to Nancy Hayward, who always just looked like a Bond villain to me with that like peroxide blonde hair, and I think it was naturally white hair, but looks like he should be spinning around in a leather chair holding a cat with the same hair. The lower order don't add a lot, but Hussain is still able to bat through 2 full days. It is a horrific go slow, really. They declare overnight after 2 days at 366 for 9. Ooh. So they declare for the morning of day 3, and they've only made 366.
I remember this. There was rain. Yeah. I remember watching pretty much this is when...
Not a lot. They got through 85 overs on the first day and like 85 on the second day. Right. There might have been bad light because it was Durban. Okay. It usually gets dark there.
This was one of the first... This was the clump of series that were being sent back to Australia that England are playing in different parts of the world. We would get the England stuff. We'd get the England home summer. But this was the era when we were getting England playing Pakistan, England playing Sri Lanka, England playing, in this case, South Africa. And, us having a much better understanding of their players who are coming through. Like Michael Vaughan made his test debut in this series, I'm pretty sure. Graham Swan made his one-day international debut on that trip too. So, that it's a nice childhood memory before we were all addicted to our phones and had broken brains. You could kind of tune in and watch 6 hours of cricket and take most of it in.
Right. So, anyway, they bat for that 2 days. It seems to have worked because they go through South Africa in 50 overs for 156. Andy Caddick takes 7 for 46, and what remained his best figures for his entire career. That never changed. And then after they enforced the follow-on, Gary Kirsten does Nasser Hussain and more and more and more. He bats for 878 minutes. Ugh.
It's like the 4th longest innings ever, isn't
Something
it?
like that, it's right up there. To make 275, we've talked about Mark Butcher bowling him behind his legs with an off break, bowling filthy loopy off spin. Kirsten's a left-hander. As it goes around his legs to hit the stumps, but that's the last ball. They shake hands at that point. Basically, they're just batting to see if he can make a 100 at that stage, and once he's out, they shake hands on the draw. Kellis makes 69, nice. Mark Boucher makes 100. It's a real grind. They make 572, our number, for 7, meaning South Africa are leading by well over 300, but no time to try to bowl out England, and they're leading the series 1-0. There's been 1 draw, and South Africa have won 1, so they're like, we'll just draw this one.
Yep.
Real attritional 90s shit. But one other thing, as far as looking at bowling figures of 5 for 72, never been taken in a women's international of any format, but given we were talking about South Africa and given that today is the 4th of March, 2 years since Shane Warne left us, I thought it would be appropriate to mention the Sydney Test of 1994 when Shane Warne did take 5 for 72 in the second innings after taking 7 for 56 in the first. He got Daryl Cullinan twice, of course, bowled once, LBW once. It was Jonty Rhodes who just held Warne at bay for long enough with 76 not out to get them that slender lead, which South Africa were able to defend very, very narrowly. Should have been a triumphant game for Warne. 12 wickets in the match, set it all up, and the batters let him down. But one of his 10 matches where he took 10 or more wickets.
Yeah, remarkable the way that Warne bowled on day 1. There's the great Richie Beno commentary, how he sets Cullinan up with the 2 flippers and taking 7 for 4 days later that they'd be bowled out for 105 or whatever it was and lose the test match. And, you know, lots been said around discussing, at least in our commentary, old New Zealand test matches and Damien Martin playing so well here in 2000. But that was his return series, having... as we know, been dropped in January 94 for what was seen to be the shot that cost them the test match.
You better believe that with Jim Maxwell and Brian Waddle in the box, we've been talking about old New Zealand test matches. They were at them all.
Well, there's quite a fun bit for us this week.
It would have been Jim's first year, actually, wouldn't it? 74.
It was. Well, he did
73-4 when New Zealand toured Australia.
It was Pakistan that he did the test of in 1974, but the New Zealand series that follows that in 74 over here is when New Zealand win their first match against Australia. Glenn Turner's
Devon
twin hundreds,
and
that is 50th. The 50th anniversary of that's being recognised on the eve of the Christchurch Test match. They're inviting all the living players from both teams to attend. So Jerry's been very excited about that, and it'll be a great fun. So we'll definitely go. Might take our microphone with us as well and see if we can chat to a few of the veterans from the test match at Lancaster Park 50 years ago when New Zealand finally broke the duck against Australia. I say finally, by the way, one test match in 1946 and didn't play again at all until 73, 74. Didn't take them long to beat Australia, just in years that they were treated with such disrespect and having second 11 sent over and unofficial test matches and all that bullshit.
That's Turner's twin tons.
It is Turner's twin tons, So there's twin tons for both Chappell brothers at the Basin, and then at Christchurch, Turner. Final word fave as well.
And as Jim said, he was at Ian Chappell's 80th birthday recently and was roasting him about this game, saying you're the first captain to lose to New Zealand, and pointing out that Kerry O'Keefe didn't bowl a ball in the match.
That's right,
and he reckoned he had Glenn Turner's number. He got Glenn Turner out plenty of times in other games, and he didn't get a bowl at him.
It's a really weird scorecard for that. I was looking through trying to work out what he would have bowled, but didn't get a go.
Jim reckoned they were just trying to knock Turner's head off for most of the game.
Right. Yeah, I think Dimmock played. I think Lilly did play, and possibly Walker was the other quick. Anyway, we'll have more of a chance to talk about that later in the week when we get to Christchurch, or Ch as it says when you are there on all the street signs.
Chick, 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 if your band name has 3 exclamation marks.
Chick, chick, boom.
Patreon.com/thefinalword if you want to help support us. Another way you can do that is if you need a VPN, because NordVPN are doing this deal with us where you get free months if you sign up to a long deal. If you're a techie, this is a particular angle they're looking at. You can encrypt your traffic to stop your ISP from throttling your bandwidth based on traffic type.
No one wants their bandwidth throttled.
On traffic type.
Maybe they do.
Maybe Michael Hutchins.
Yeah, he wanted to get his throttle bandwidth. Bandwidth throttled.
Wedge or lemon. Don't forget the wedge or lemon. That is a thing that is useful because some ISPs are like, we'll just kill certain websites because we don't want the traffic from those clogging up our network. Well, you can get around that. You can route your traffic through 2 servers for extra security with the double VPN, DVPN, if you will.
Double glove.
Link devices with MeshNet for secure file sharing, collaborations, and LAN gaming, if that's your bag. Or you can get a dedicated IP to avoid online block lists and preserve your IP's reputation. Never heard about IP reputation, but apparently that's what you can do.
Well, I've been using my NordVPN quite a bit while I've been here in New Zealand over the last week. So again, we have that lived experience of being VPN users. We were with Nord before we were working with them. This is a terrific deal. To get the best discount off your NordVPN plan, go to nordvpn.com/TFW. No risk, 30-day money-back guarantee, and you'll help support, of course, the podcast and the partnership that we have with Nord. The link and all the information is right there in those show notes of yours. Click it, get it, do it. Now, we're going to take a breather briefly. On the other side of it, we'll start with the mighty Irish.